In this video, I'll be ranking bodybuilders from arguably the most legendary era in bodybuilding, the 1990s. Some of the biggest names in history came out of this decade, and while I have ranked many of them before, this time I'm doing it differently. I'm ranking them based only on what they achieved during the 1990s. Also, this video can only be so long, so if I missed your favorite 90s competitor, please let me know. For the tiers, S+ is for competitors who completely dominated the 1990s, consistently winning the biggest shows and bringing unmatched physiques. S is for competitors who were legendary and always in the mix, placing highly and winning bigger shows. A tiers for bodybuilders who were consistent, but not quite perennial Olympia top 3 material. B tiers for solid 90s pros who weren't really Olympia or big show threats, and then finally you have C tier, which is for competitors with limited impact in the 90s, yet are still legendary in their own right. Alright, starting off the video, we have Charles Claremont. He had one of the most aesthetically pleasing and underrated physiques of the 1990s, and he only competed during this decade. His arms and quads were extremely impressive, and his shape and proportions were stellar, but I feel like he didn't have anything remarkable about him. Charles was very balanced and detailed frontally, but he didn't have outstanding muscle size, nor amazing condition from behind. His best Mr. Olympia placing came in 1993, where he took 7th place, and he actually seemed to hover around that range during the 5 Olympias he competed in. Interestingly, his 4 professional wins all came in 1993, never winning a show after that year. So, while Charles had a criminally underappreciated physique, I can understand how he got overlooked in an era with such genetic depth. Since he never had a big impact at the highest level, but did bring a fantastic physique, I'd put him in B tier. Great physique and a memorable competitor, but not a true threat on the Olympia stage. Next, we have Mike Francois, who, like Charles, competed exclusively in the 1990s. In my opinion, his most impressive accomplishment is by far his win at the 1995 Arnold Classic, where he beat out the heavy favorite Flex Wheeler. Mike never had a quote-unquote pretty physique, lacking the aesthetics that some more memorable competitors may have had, but he did have great mass and great definition. He definitely peaked career-wise from 1994 to 95, where he won every show he competed in apart from the Olympia, where he would ultimately take 7th in 1995. Unfortunately, he would never win another professional show again, competing only at the Olympia in 1996 and taking 10th, and then falling short of wins in 1997. His final Mr. Olympia appearance was that 1997 Olympia, where he would take 11th place, which isn't really unrecoverable from a career perspective, but the nail in the coffin for his career was his stomach cancer diagnosis. Thankfully, he was able to recover, but he never would return to competitive bodybuilding, leaving a lot of what-ifs on the table. Overall, while Mike was a seriously competitive bodybuilder and had a very impressive physique at his best, he really isn't in that elite or legendary category when it comes to fame or notoriety. Because of this, I would probably place him in A tier, as he had a solid standout Arnold Classic win, but failed to capitalize on his momentum after. Now let's move on to Vince Taylor, who competed in the late 80s all the way into the late 2000s. While Vince is probably best known for being the greatest Masters Olympia ever, winning 5, 3 of which were in the 90s, he also won other very prestigious shows, like the Arnold in 1992 and the Ironman in the same year and in 1994. He was also one of the most winning pro bodybuilders ever, winning 22 professional shows, all but 3 were in the 1990s. With all these wins, you would expect a world-class physique, right? Well, that is exactly what Vince brought. He had some of the craziest arms, great clavicle width, impressive detail, and amazing posing. Everything flowed really well, and he brought great charisma and confidence to the stage. As the decade went on, he would begin to get outclassed by younger, more genetically gifted bodybuilders, but he always managed to stay very competitive. Throughout all of the 90s, he was never outside of the top 10 at any show, and more often than not, he was either winning or in the top 3. So because of his extensive resume, memorable physique, and general competitiveness, I would place him in the S tier. Sure, he might not have had the best physique out of the 90s, but he certainly deserves respect for all that he achieved. Also, if you guys are enjoying the video so far, a like and sub would really be awesome, as it helps out the channel tremendously. Next is Paul Dlet, who simply needs no introduction. According to many, Paul was the definition of a Mr. Olympia champion when you would look at him backstage or before hitting a pose. His immense width from shoulder to shoulder, combined with his minuscule waist and massive limbs, gave him an unmistakable silhouette. He was also gifted with some of the best genetics ever, yet he never truly took advantage of them. You see, Paul had some difficulties posing properly. He never seemed comfortable or fully opened up, and this definitely hurt his performances. Despite his highest Olympia placing of 4th in 1994, and 2 top 5 finishes as well, Paul never managed to win a major show apart from the Night of Champions in 1999. Interestingly, he only won 3 pro shows, despite being so legendary and famous in modern bodybuilding. You would think that someone with such genetics and mass would be a shoo-in for any show, but the horrendous posing and lack of back development completely hindered his placings. Because of his unique circumstances, that being having incredible genetics and being a true 90s legend, yet never really capitalizing on these things, I would have Paul Dlet in A tier. Great physique when relaxed and superimposing in certain poses like the crucifix, but amateur-esque and downright bad in others. Moving on, we have Nasser Samati, who competed during the 90s for the majority of his competitive career. His most notable wins were at the 1995 Night of Champions and the 1999 Arnold Classic, and his most infamous career moment was at the 1997 Olympia, where many believe that he was robbed. Nasser only really started to get competitive in 1993, where he would place within the top 5 at most shows, excluding the Mr. Olympia, and his career would peak around 1997 to 1999. He was able to be so consistent due to his massive frame, great proportions, and top-tier muscle development. Although he was never the most conditioned, especially from behind, he always had the mass and shape to contend at the highest level. That said, come the 2000s, he fell off hard and he started to abuse site enhancements and his physique deteriorated significantly, but thankfully we are only focusing on the 90s. Like Paul, you would think that someone so well known would have more, wins under his belt, but Nasser only won 6 professional shows. Obviously, this is nothing to scoff at, as many of us will probably never even turn pro, but it's way less than many would think. Overall, I think I would give him S tier because he won 2 of the biggest shows, that being the Arnold Classic and the Night of Champions, and arguably should have won the 1997 Olympia. He's a legend and to many an uncrowned Mr. Olympia, who had an unmistakable physique of the 1990s. Now we have Chris Cormier, who was always very consistent but could never reach that next level. Although he was always in the mix at big shows like the Olympia and the Arnold Classic, where he placed top 3 and 2 respectively many times, he never could distinguish himself enough to win. He did win the Ironman and the Night of Champions in the 90s, and I would argue that his physique was the most polished and aesthetic during this time. His look from the 1998 or 99 Olympias was near perfect. He had great balance from head to toe with amazing proportions, deep cuts and separation, and no glaring flaws. Although Chris competed mainly during the 1990s, it wasn't until 1997 that he finally found his stride, and some may argue that his most competitive days were actually in the early 2000s. In my opinion, since Chris took so long to find his footing in the 90s, but did win some very impressive shows and took high placings, I would place him in A tier. He did get those top 3 placings later on, but he never won the Arnold or was in serious contention for the win at any Olympia in the 1990s. Here's Labrada, who began his career in the mid-80s, but physique-wise was probably at his best in the 90s. Many know Lee for his incredible proportions and fantastic posing, but many forget how competitive he actually was in the 90s. To start, he took second to Lee Haney at the very controversial 1990 Olympia. This was the year the IFBB decided to drug test competitors, which resulted in many coming in off or disqualified. Labrada looked great, yet Haney, who was large but not at his best, walked away with his 7th Sandow. He would take 4th in 1991, which was the year Dorian Yates came onto the scene, and then in 1992 he would take 3rd behind Kevin Lrone and Dorian Yates. 1993 was his final Olympia appearance, but also his most competitive year in the 90s, as he would compete in 3 shows: the Ironman, the Arnold Classic, and the Mr. Olympia. At the first 2 shows, he competed against a young Flex Wheeler who undoubtedly was at his all-time best, but Labrada kept up and didn't make either an easy win. The Olympia later that year was his final appearance on the big stage, where he took a respectable 4th. He would compete one last time at the 1995 Arnold Classic, where he took 5th place and then retired from competitive bodybuilding. Overall, due to his short yet extremely consistent run in the 90s, I would give him A tier. I know that I said that A tier is for bodybuilders who are consistent, yet not top 3 Olympian level consistent, yet the fact that Labrada failed to win a single show in the 1990s cancels out his multiple top 3 finishes in my opinion, so that's why I placed him in A tier. Next is Aaron Baker, a truly underrated bodybuilder who had a great physique and inspired the likes of Ronnie Coleman. His first professional competition was in 1993, and he retired a decade later, and throughout his entire pro career, he never won a single competition. He was never in the top 10 at the Olympia, although he did break into those higher placings at bigger shows like the Ironman or Arnold. Despite this though, Aaron had one of my personal favorite physiques ever. He had great fullness and nice separation, solid proportions, great arms and quads, and filled out nicely for his frame. He wasn't the widest, didn't have the most dramatic wow factor or crazy stage presence, but he always came in complete and always came to win. I always found it weird that such an impressive physique could be overlooked so much, despite noticeable improvements year after year after year. I've always been a fan of his physique, and it's a shame that he didn't find more success during the 90s. Regardless of my opinion towards him, and the things that could have been, based on his career and physique, I would have to place him unfortunately in C tier. He was a legend, no doubt, but objectively had little impact on the competitive sport. Now, this is a competitor that I'm sure many of you were not expecting, Darham Charles. Darham competed as early as 1989, all the way until the Masters Olympia in 2023, and was probably the most competitive in the early 2000s. That said, he competed a lot during the 1990s, so I decided to throw him in here. To put it bluntly, Darham always seemed to be a bit undersized compared to the competition, no matter what decade he was competing in. He always had nice shape, great detail, and appeared to compete for the love of the game, but his placings were never stellar. While he would occasionally place in that top 5 at seasonal shows, he never came close to being a real threat at the highest level, during the 90s at least. His most impressive placing was probably at the 1998 Ironman, where he took 2nd behind Flex Wheeler, whereas his best Olympia placing from the 90s was 13th. Altogether, while I respect Darham for his commendable work ethic and ridiculously impressive longevity as a bodybuilder, he barely had any influence on the competitive side of bodybuilding during this decade. I'd give him C tier because of that. However, if we were judging the 2000s, he would probably place a whole lot higher. 10th so far is Shawn Ray, who might have been the definition of consistent for the 1990s. He never placed outside of the top 5 at the Olympia during this decade, won some major shows like the Arnold Classic in 1990 and 1991, although he was disqualified in 1990, and took at least top 5 at any show he competed in. According to his competition history, Shawn only won 3 shows, 2 if we count out the disqualification. He basically only competed at the Mr. Olympia, focusing year after year after year on winning that coveted Sandow. His best placings came in 1994 and 96, where many believed that he could have won the Mr. Olympia. In both, he placed 2nd behind Dorian Yates, who wasn't at his 100% in either year, but won based on overwhelming mass and condition. Outside of raw statistics, Shawn had one of the most impressive, aesthetic, and desirable physiques of all time. His elite posing showcased his near-perfect symmetry, proportion, and condition, and he was always very confident on stage. Despite having a smaller stature and taking up less square footage on stage, his silhouette and shape drew your attention immediately. So when it comes to rankings, it is very difficult. Shawn didn't quite dominate the 90s like some other competitors on this list, but he was also very consistently dangerous. I'd probably place him in S tier due to his wins at the Arnold and consistent top 5 or better Olympia finishes, but no higher since he always seemed to be a step below the best ever. Next is the legendary Maryland muscle machine, Kevin Lrone. Kevin is probably best known for being a figurehead of the uncrowned Mr. Olympia movement. Many fans believed that he should have won the Olympia at least one time, despite any objective backing. Although Kevin did have some ridiculously impressive stats, 4 runner-up finishes at the Olympia with 2 in the 90s, 2 Arnold Classic wins, and a total of 21 professional wins in the 1990s, he often struggled to put it all together when it mattered the most. Yes, he did have an incredible physique with some of the best genetics of all time, some very dominant wins, and an amazing legacy, but he was not the most consistent or dominant force of the decade. At both the 1992 and 95 Olympias, where he was the runner-up, he was certainly a clear second-place finisher, but he was never, in my opinion, close to taking the title from Dorian. And while he racked up an impressive number of pro wins, many of them came at smaller shows, and he often fell short at the biggest events. Kevin was also fairly inconsistent in my own opinion. He could go from winning back-to-back pro shows to placing uncharacteristically low. This was partly due to his training philosophy, where he would take most of the year off and then only prep 2 to 3 months out of competition season, and obviously he would get better as the season would go on. Now, don't get me wrong, Kevin Lrone is absolutely one of the greatest bodybuilders out of the 90s, and probably of all time. But when we are talking about the most dominant competitors of the decade, the ones that truly shaped the era like Dorian, Ronnie, or some other guys like that, Kevin falls slightly short in my opinion. So while his legacy is undeniable and his resume is stacked, I think a solid S-tier placement is more accurate than something like S+. Let me know in the comments though, where would you rank him? Moving on, we have JeanPierre Fuks, who is a true mass monster and unfortunately suffered one of the freakiest injuries in all of bodybuilding history. If you didn't know, in 2002, while attempting a 700-pound squat, JeanPierre tore both quads, an injury that basically ended his career. That said, since we are focusing on the 90s, we can pretend like that never happened. Now, he was never the most competitive bodybuilder out there, never truly making an impact on the sport like some other names in this video. He competed at his first pro show in 1996 and made it to the Olympia the following year, where he took 7th, his best Olympia placing during his short career. Outside of this, he was never really in the conversation for winning a top show, with his best placings being 4th at the 1998 Arnold Classic, and then 2nd at the 1996 Russian Grand Prix. Interestingly, he was never able to win a single professional show, probably due to the lack of aesthetics or inconsistent condition. Honestly, there really isn't much to be said about JeanPierre Fuks. He's probably best known for his 1997 Olympia appearance, where he somewhat resembled Dorian Yates from behind. Apart from that, he didn't really do much in the 90s and isn't a famous star like Kevin or Flex. So I think I would have to give him C tier. True bodybuilding fans appreciate and admire his work ethic, but also understand that his accomplishments and physical flaws cannot really be placed any higher. Now we have Andreas Munzer, who, unlike JeanPierre, was always on the money when it came to condition. Although he never won a pro show, his deathly level of detail made him more famous than any trophy could. He literally looked like an anatomy chart with paper-thin skin and detail that etched in a way that exposed every single muscle fiber. When it came to placings, he wasn't that bad, taking 3rd and 4th at the 1990 and 1995 Arnold Classic respectively, and having a Best Olympia placing of 9th, which he received in 1990, 93, and 94. He also came very close to winning the 1993 Night of Champions, which for sure would have elevated his status on this list. When it comes to his physique outside of that condition, he was actually rather balanced. Sure, his legs were rather dominant compared to his upper body, but overall everything flowed nicely and the added detail only enhanced his physique. That said, due to him coming close to winning some big shows and placing in the middle of the pack at smaller ones, I think I would probably have him in B tier. He had a nice physique with elite condition that would ultimately be his demise, and he isn't some forgotten or overlooked name from the 90s. Here's a name that almost everyone of all time knows, Ronnie Coleman. As many of you know, Ronnie is an 8-time Mr. Olympia winner, one of the most winning bodybuilders as well, and basically achieved everything you could hope for, both in terms of physique and resume. That said, he actually only found success during the late 90s, struggling for most of his career up until 1998. Prior to that, he was barely cracking the top 10 at the Olympia, placing in the second or third call-out at smaller shows, and he only won 3 professional competitions between 1992 and 1997. But as we all know, he would go on to dominate the 1998 competitive season, winning every show after his final loss to Kevin Lrone at the 1998 San Francisco Pro. He had one of the most interesting career trajectories since he went from nothing to GOAT status overnight. He technically didn't dominate the 90s in terms of time spent at the top, but during the 1998 and 1999, years I would say, he was virtually unbeatable. Because of all that, I would have to say that it's a no-brainer for S+ tier. Some of his best performances were at the 1998 and 1999 Olympias, as well as all the smaller shows that he competed in between. He literally beat every single legend available, and in a very dominant fashion, might I add, and nobody could ever derail his progress. Next is the Shadow, Dorian Yates. I think this one should be pretty self-explanatory. Dorian was the definition of dominant during the 90s. He came onto the scene in 1991, where he took second to Lee Haney at the Olympia. Seeing the writing on the wall, Haney retired on top, leaving Dorian unopposed the year after. And by coming onto the scene, I mean at the Olympia. He actually, was competing prior to that. Now, after that 1991 Olympia, Dorian would never lose a bodybuilding show again, and in fact only lost 2 shows ever, the 1990 Night of Champions and the aforementioned 1991 Olympia. He completely steamrolled every competition he entered, most of which were Mr. Olympias, and he had some incredibly dominant performances. His most memorable were the 1993 and 95 Olympias, where he looked absolutely unreal, and outside of the Olympias, his 1996 German Grand Prix, for example, is remembered for that grainy footage that has become legendary. That said, he did have his fair share of controversy. You had the 1994 and 1996 Olympias, where many believed Shawn Ray was the clear winner because he possessed the aesthetics, the proportion, and the symmetry favored in the golden era. Most famous out of the controversies was that 1997 Olympia, where Dorian was bloated, mangled, and worn out, yet still managed to cling on to victory. Overall, with a very impressive list of wins, including 6 Mr. Olympia titles and a total of 15 professional wins, I think Dorian easily makes it into that S+ tier. He completely dominated over his competition, set a new standard for condition and mass, and left everyone waiting in his shadow. Moving on, we have Lee Haney. Now, it might be surprising to see Haney on this list since many remember him for his dominance during the 1980s. That said, you can't forget that 2 of his Mr. Olympia wins were in the 90s, one being ultra-controversial and the other being a strong farewell. Although Haney competed in only 2 shows during the 1990s, both of which he won, I wouldn't really necessarily call either dominant. In 1990, he beat out Lee Labrada controversially, since many believed that Haney was off the mark. This was because the IFBB decided to drug test the show, causing many, including Haney, to lose some of that wow factor and pop. While he would walk away with the win, it was undoubtedly close. Then there was 1991, where a young Dorian Yates challenged Haney harder than anyone ever had. He had the structure, the height, the condition, and most importantly, the mass. Haney looked far better than in 1990, possibly at his all-time best, but it wasn't a blowout win for the 8-time Mr. Olympia. To be fair though, winning 2 Olympias during one of the most competitive eras of all time is very impressive and should automatically mean you were a dominant threat. No matter how controversial the win, Haney was chosen as the standard and therefore the man to beat. I think it would be criminal to rate him anything less than S+, although the sparse competition history and questionable circumstances may change your opinion. Coming up, we have another so-called uncrowned Mr. Olympia, Flex Wheeler. Flex had a roller coaster of a career during the 90s, from kidney disease symptoms, supposed ninja attacks, near-fatal car crashes, and an entire bathtub of synthol. All that aside, Flex actually had a really impressive resume during the 90s, winning shows like the Arnold the Iron Man Night of Champions, some of which he won multiple times. He also had some of his best Olympia performances during the 90s, placing second at his Olympia debut in 1993, and then second again in 1998 and 1999. Racking up 16 pro wins during the decade, it is safe to say that Flex was accomplished and very dangerous at any show. I would say that his 1993 physique was probably one of the best to ever walk this earth. He had perfect symmetry and proportion, dug out glutes and hamstring detail, immense fullness and pop, and the right amount of muscle. Later on, he would get some issues dialing in his lower body condition from behind, and unfortunately use site enhancements to artificially inflate his already cartoonishly round muscle bellies. In my opinion, out of all the 90s legends to not win an Olympia, Flex was the closest to doing so. In 1993, it truly could have gone either way, depending on what direction the judges wanted to go in. In 1998 and 1999, it wasn't close, but Flex did stand out for being an icon of aesthetics. Also, winning the Arnold 3 times during the decade and having 3 top 2 finishes as well at the Olympia speaks volumes to his dominance. While some may disagree, I think I would place Flex in the S+ tier. Obviously not as dominant as the Olympia champions he sits next to, but more impressive than the rest of the Olympia competitors here. Now let's go to Milos Sarsv, an icon in current bodybuilding for being an ambassador and coach, but many forget how impressive his physique was during the 90s. Milos competed at nearly 70 professional shows during the decade, but only ever managed to win one during his entire career, being the 1997 Toronto Pro. Some other notable placings were his second place at the 1997 Night of Champions, second again at the 1999 Ironman, and 10th at the Olympia in 1999. He seemed to compete for the love of it, and that alone is very commendable, but when it comes to success, there was very little of it. Sure, he was placing within the top 3 at some smaller shows occasionally, but he always lacked the wow factor and mass to contend with the top competitors. His midsection was actually very impressive, and the conditioning he brought was underrated, but he ruined his physique later by injecting synthol into his arms, completely changing what were decent insertions into a mediocre mess. Overall, I don't think Milos was a bad pro by any means, and he certainly wasn't forgettable, but only winning one pro show and never breaking past the top 10 at the Olympia is simply not super impressive from a competitive standpoint. I'd have him no higher than B tier, since he was solid but never a real threat at the highest level. Second to last is Lee Priest, who is one of the most outspoken competitors of all time. He was always known for having some of the best genetics when it came to building muscle, phenomenal total arm development, and impressive mass for someone of his stature. He was routinely able to beat bigger competitors who outweighed him by like 40-50 pounds, simply because he was so dense, freaky, and well-developed. When it came to consistency, though, he was never the most shredded competitor out there, but usually had passable or very solid condition. His glutes and hamstrings were always on the softer side in my own opinion, but I've definitely seen them ripped to shreds before. As for competitive abilities, though, he never won a professional show during the 90s, but he would go on to win 3 in the 2000s. His best Olympia appearance came in 1997, where he took number 6 very controversially. He also had a second-place finish at the 1997 Ironman and countless top 3 placings at other events. That all said, I think a lot of his lack of professional wins comes down to politics. I'm almost certain that his unfiltered words caused many to sway in favor of more marketable names, causing him to lose out on wins and notoriety. When he was on, he was always very competitive and a force to be dealt with, but due to his raw stats and lack of wins during the 90s, I only see him at B tier. Although I do think he could have done way more with his physique, I don't really see him any higher than B based on what we have seen. Finally, to round out the list, we have Mike Modarazzo. He had some really impressive arms and calves, usually came in great condition, and brought a solid look to the stage. Was he the most aesthetic or balanced competitor out there? Definitely not, but he worked with what he had and he looked good. He turned pro in 1991, and until 1997, he competed with varying degrees of success. His best placings prior to 1997 was a second-place finish at the 93 Pittsburgh Pro and a top Olympia placing of 13th. That said, in 1997, he was able to place second at the Toronto Pro and then 4th at the Night of Champions, but unfortunately took 13th again at the Olympia and fell short at the post-Olympia shows. 1998 would be better though, as he would place a career high of 9th at the Olympia and take 3rd at the Night of Champions. That said, he was never able to win a professional competition and wasn't considered a serious threat at the highest level. Unfortunately for Mike, in 1997 he started having blood complications which would eventually lead to significant heart issues. His commitment to his craft was what ultimately ended his life early, as he dealt with significant heart complications all the way until he passed in 2014. Overall, while Mike's work ethic was commendable and you could tell he loved the competitive aspect of bodybuilding, his career outcome and physique ultimately land in C tier. Despite this, he was an idol for many fans due to his great attitude and work ethic, and this ranking should definitely not dictate that. Anyways, that about does it for this video. Let me know in the comments down below if there is anyone I missed and where you would rank them. With that all being said, I do hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.